The day Margaret Wyndham called the sheriff on me for illegally fishing in her lake was the same day she unknowingly signed her own eviction notice. It was early morning, dawn breaking over the mist, and I was at my usual spot where I'd been casting lines for 23 years, when this sharp, piercing voice split the calm air like fingernails scraping a chalkboard. "You're trespassing on HOA property," she barked. Moments later, a deputy rolled up looking more awkward than a cat in a bathtub. "Sorry, Theo," he said, eyes downcast. She filed a formal complaint. "I've got to ask you to leave." And there she was, Margaret, standing smugly in her pastel getup, that little victory smile plastered across her face while I packed up my tackle box. The snap of it closing echoed across the lake like a gunshot. What she didn't realize was that I had full rights to this lake, not just fishing access. I owned it. Every drop. And this newcomer had been charging my neighbors $200 a month for using my property. Time to remind her that sometimes the fish bite back. So tell me, what would you do if some Karen tried to steal your favorite fishing spot? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I bet you've got HOA horror stories too. I'm Theo Blackstone. I came to Pine Ridge Lake in 1999 after losing my wife Sarah to cancer at just 48. I needed quiet, a place to start over. My grandfather left me 2 acres of untouched land overlooking the lake. I built the cabin myself, plank by plank, nail by nail. When your hands stay busy, your heart doesn't hurt quite as much. That lake became my therapy. Every morning for 23 years, I'd cast into the still, dark water while fog drifted across the surface like wandering spirits. The air smelled of pine and damp soil. Loons called from the distance. Gravel crunched beneath my boots at the boat ramp. This wasn't just fishing. It was healing. Pine Ridge Lake spans 40 acres, a spring-fed beauty ringed by old cabins like mine, and, more recently, those oversized McMansions that began popping up around 2015. The longtime residents were good folks, veterans, teachers, retirees, people who shared tools, swapped fish, and never judged the rust on your truck or the weeds on your lawn. Then the wave of gentrification hit, and riding at the crest was Margaret Wyndham, blowing into town like a designer hurricane. She showed up about 6 months ago in a white BMW SUV with a blessed vanity plate, fresh off a divorce and clutching the deed to an $800,000 lakeside home. She was 48, with that stiff helmet hair that could survive a wind tunnel. Always overdressed, like she was on her way to a board meeting instead of living next to a fishing hole. A former corporate compliance officer from Atlanta, which explained her knack for turning every casual chat into a hostile negotiation. She wasted no time taking over. Within 2 weeks, she held what she called a concerned homeowners meeting. Her pitch: Pine Ridge Lake needed an HOA for safety and property values. She even brought charts and PowerPoint slides, talking about optimizing community assets and reducing recreational liability. I hadn't heard that much corporate nonsense since my construction days. But her real target was everything that made our little community special: our freedom, our peace. She wanted fishing limits, dock permits, and landscaping standards that could have put Augusta National to shame. And the kicker: she declared the lake itself a shared community area, demanding $200 a month from each household for access. She convinced 8 of the 23 property owners, mostly newcomers scared about their property values. The rest of us got certified letters insisting we join her shiny new HOA. I called her up, polite as my mama taught me. "Ma'am, I appreciate your effort," I said, "but I'm not interested." Her tone could have frozen the lake solid. "It's not optional, Mr. Blackstone. This affects everyone's investment." "Ma'am," I said, "I don't have investments. I have a home." The silence that followed felt longer than a tax audit before she hung up. 2 weeks later, new laminated signs sprouted around the lake like a rash: private HOA property members only. Their glossy plastic glared under the morning sun, an ugly scar across what once was a shared sanctuary. I kept fishing anyway. What else was I supposed to do? This lake was my solace, my connection to Sarah. But Margaret started watching me through her picture window with binoculars, snapping photos like I was a fugitive instead of a widower with a fishing pole. Then came the call. Deputy Charlie Morrison, a local boy whose dad worked construction with mine, showed up again. He looked miserable. "Sorry, Theo," he muttered. "Got another complaint. Got to ask you to pack up." Margaret was on her deck in a pink cardigan that probably cost more than my truck, arms folded, smiling like she'd just cornered a chess grandmaster. I didn't argue. I quietly closed my tackle box, and the sound of that snap felt like the start of a storm. She had no idea she'd just picked a fight with the wrong fisherman. The next morning, I learned she'd filed an official trespassing report with the county, not just another phone call to Charlie, but a full written complaint with photos of me illegally accessing HOA waters. She documented my fishing trips like she was tracking cartel activity instead of bass fishing. Within 48 hours, she'd called an emergency HOA meeting to discuss non-compliance issues. Her agenda: dealing with problem residents who refused to follow her imaginary rules. To give her operation some fake legitimacy, she brought in Dale Peton, a retired bank manager with all the personality of wet cardboard, as HOA treasurer. Nothing says official like a man who's spent 40 years foreclosing on people's dreams. Then came her next move, identifying for other problem properties: Eddie Kowalski's place with the garden gnomes, the Martinez family's cabin with the unapproved fishing boat, and Old Frank's vegetable patch, which she claimed violated aesthetic standards. And then there was the Johnsons' old dock, the same one that had been standing there for 15 years before Margaret ever showed up. We all received violation notices on the very same day. The sharp, rapid click of Margaret's designer heels across our driveways sounded less like a delivery route and more like the countdown to war. Betty's alleged offense: her unapproved garden gnome collection, as supposedly a threat to neighborhood aesthetic standards. I wish I were joking. The poor woman was being fined over ceramic lawn ornaments that had been smiling in her yard since the Carter administration. That evening, Betty came to my door, her weathered hands shaking as she clutched one of Margaret's legal-sounding letters. The faint scent of lavender trailed behind her, mixed with something else: fear. "Theo," she said softly, "I don't understand half of this, but it says I owe $50 a day until I remove my gnomes. They belong to my late husband." That's when I decided to do what any sensible person does when backed into a corner by a bully: dig deep into the facts. The county courthouse sat downtown, an old red brick relic that smelled like dusty paper, stale coffee, and decades of broken dreams. I spent Tuesday morning in the land records office talking to Joyce Miller, a clerk who's been there since the earth cooled. Joyce has the patience of a saint and a memory sharper than any filing cabinet. She squinted at the whole paperwork through glasses thick enough to start fires. "Son," she said, "this is a mess, like a soup sandwich." According to Joyce, Margaret's so-called HOA documents were missing all the essentials: property descriptions, boundary surveys, and proof of legal authority. That's when she schooled me on adverse possession laws. You can't just claim control over land you don't legally own, no matter how many laminated signs you post. "Always check county records," she told me. "And HOA can't demand money or authority without defined boundaries filed with us. Don't hand over a cent until you've verified it." While I was neck-deep in property law, Margaret escalated her campaign. She hired private security as some young guy who looked like he'd rather wrestle gators than babysit fishermen. She stationed him at the boat ramp during peak hours, trying to scare folks off. The kid had the energy of a wet dish rag and the confidence of a mall cop on his first shift. I strolled up Wednesday morning, tackle box in hand, boots crunching over the frost. "Morning," I said. "Mind telling me what legal authority you've got to enforce HOA rules?" He squirmed like he had ants in his uniform. The lady said to stay visible and take pictures of anyone fishing without permission." "Permission from who, exactly?" I asked. He shifted again. The HOA," I smiled, cast my line, and the gentle plop of the lure hitting the water broke the silence. "Well, you have a nice day, son. Make sure you wave for those photos." That security guard lasted exactly 3 days. Turns out, watching an old man fish and snapping creepy surveillance shots wasn't quite the adventure he'd signed up for. But Margaret wasn't finished. She brought in real muscle: the lawyer. Some slick county attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. I was fixing Betty's porch step when the cease and desist letter arrived. Because that's what neighbors do around here, we help each other. The letter was a masterpiece of legal overcomplication, stuffed with words like forthwith and pursuant to, demanding $500 in administrative fees and immediate compliance with her bogus fishing restrictions. Betty read it over my shoulder, her face paling with every sentence. "What's so funny?" she asked when I started laughing. I folded the letter and tucked it into my shirt pocket. Margaret just picked a fight with the wrong fisherman. See, while she'd been busy hiring lawyers and rent-a-cops, I'd been doing my homework. That morning at the courthouse, I'd stumbled onto something fascinating: the 1960s county survey showing the lake boundaries stretched well beyond the area Margaret claimed for her HOA. Even better, my grandfather's old deed mentioned subsurface mineral rights. It was time to find out exactly what kind of inheritance Grandpa Blackstone had left behind, because I had a feeling it was more than Margaret bargained for. Margaret's attorney letter triggered what she called an emergency enforcement meeting at her lakefront mansion. Her living room looked like a cross between a corporate boardroom and a country club: beige leather furniture, motivational art about success, and the overpowering scent of expensive vanilla candles and ego. Her loyal band of 8 HOA members sat nervously clutching their violation notices like shields against reason. "Property values are at stake," Margaret declared, clicking through her PowerPoint slides like she was announcing a hostile corporate takeover rather than bullying retirees. Her plan included liens, small claims court filings, and police involvement, when Dale, her timid treasurer, cautiously suggested verifying their legal authority before going further. Margaret steamrolled him like a freight train through tissue paper. "We can't show weakness," she snapped. "If we give them an inch, they'll take a mile." 2 days later, I woke up to the piercing whine of power tools at 7 in the morning. The sound was more grating than nails on a chalkboard. Margaret was out there putting up a decorative white vinyl fence right across the old footpath to the lake, the same dirt trail folks like Betty and Frank had walked for decades. The thing had fancy little flourishes that practically screamed, "I spent more on this eyesore than most people make in a month." Margaret oversaw the installation like a foreman, dressed in a lavender pantsuit and sipping from fine china that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. When Frank Martinez arrived for his doctor-ordered morning stroll, she pointed proudly to a new shiny sign that read, "Private HOA property authorized members only." "Ma'am," Frank said in that courteous, old-fashioned way of his, "I've been walking this trail since 1987. Margaret's smile could have frozen the sun. "Times change, Martinez. Safety and liability require proper management." That fence was the breaking point. She had just cut off lake access for 3 elderly neighbors whose daily walks weren't just tradition, they were doctor's prescriptions. But while Margaret was busy playing neighborhood tyrant, I was busy getting an education in something called riparian rights. Back at the courthouse, Joyce Miller, my go-to clerk and local legend, pulled out old maps and law books like she was teaching a graduate course in property law. The musty scent of aged paper filled the room as she adjusted her glasses and said, "Theo, riparian rights are trickier than a 3-card shuffle. When you own land next to water, you often inherit usage rights to sometimes a lot more than you realize." She explained that owning property along a lake or river often grants legal rights to use that water, something most landowners don't even know. Then Joyce found a clause in my grandfather's 1958 deed that made her eyebrows shoot up. "Well, now this is interesting," she said, tapping the document. "There's mention of lake bottom mineral rights. That's not something you see every day. You might want to look into what exactly your granddad bought from that mining outfit." While I was unraveling family history, Margaret ramped things up to full-blown harassment. She filed noise complaints about my boat motor, claiming it disrupted the peace at dawn. Then she called the county health department, accusing my septic tank of contaminating the lake, which led to an inspection that found absolutely nothing wrong. Next, she tried to have my dock declared unpermitted, a bold move considering that dock was older than she was. But that's where Margaret slipped up. She got greedy and careless. I hired Jake Patterson, a local surveyor, to map out my exact property lines. Best $300 I ever spent. Jake spent half the morning running measurements and the other half scratching his head like he'd found buried treasure. "Theo," he said, pointing at his survey gear, "your property extends 30 feet further into the lake than anyone thought. And I've seen notes about old mining claims from the 1940s around here. Might be worth checking what came with those." That evening, I found an envelope in my mailbox, high-quality stationery, written in fountain pen ink that smelled like old money. The handwriting had private school polish. The note inside said simply, "Check the old Thompson Mining Company records at the State Archives." Looked like someone from Margaret's own camp was starting to have doubts. Meanwhile, Margaret launched her so-called lake beautification project, paid for by HOA dues she had no authority to collect. Her plan was to remove unsafe docks conveniently, the ones belonging to elderly residents, and she even scheduled contractor visits without asking permission. In her latest HOA newsletter, she referred to the lake as our community asset, and boldly wrote, "Some people just don't understand that progress requires sacrifice." But as I reviewed Jake's survey that night, listening to loons call across the dark water, one detail stood out like a lighthouse beam: subsurface mineral rights conveyed in perpetuity. It was time for a road trip to the state capitol. Because Grandpa Blackstone hadn't just left me a peaceful fishing spot, he'd left me the key to Margaret's biggest nightmare. Margaret's confidence hit new heights after she managed to scare Frank Martinez off his morning walks. Next, she scheduled what she proudly called an enforcement action with the sheriff's department as supposedly to deal with my continued trespassing. She even drafted official-looking paperwork outlining my upcoming arrest. Her self-made fine schedule was the cherry on top of $50 a day for unauthorized lake access, payable to the Pine Ridge Lake HOA, which had about as much legal authority as my tackle box. She installed surveillance cameras aimed at fishing spots, their mechanical whirring following movement like robotic vultures circling roadkill. The equipment was top of the line, the kind banks use for actual criminals, not retirees catching breakfast. The red recording lights blinked like angry eyes every time I cast my line. Her final act of hubris came in the form of a petition, a concerned citizen's letter to the county commissioners. She gathered 47 signatures, mostly from her church circle and country club acquaintances, people who'd never laid eyes on Pine Ridge Lake except through her curated Facebook posts about unregulated recreational threats. Her plan was to present the petition at the next county meeting, complete with PowerPoint slides that could have made a corporate consultant cry with joy. She'd even booked a caterer for the post-meeting celebration and invited the local paper to cover her grand enforcement victory. While Margaret planned her little parade, I packed my truck for a 3-day trip to the state capitol archives. The place reeked of bureaucracy, the air thick with dust, old paper, and the faint smell of frustrated researchers. I spent those days combing through Thompson Mining Company records from 1943 to 1962, and covering more about my grandfather's business dealings than any family reunion ever revealed. What I found was eye-opening. Thompson Mining hadn't leased mineral rights, they had purchased every mineral and water right associated with Pine Ridge Lake for copper exploration. The copper wasn't worth much, but those legal rights were never rescinded when the company folded. Most folks don't know it, but mineral rights and surface rights can be owned separately. Always check both if you've got property near water or old industrial land you might own for more than you realize. The paper trail was crystal clear. In 1965, Thompson Mining sold those rights to a consolidated holding company, and that's when I knew Margaret's empire was built on borrowed land and borrowed time. When that company dissolved in 1978, its assets were divided among the individual partners. One of them was Theodore Bud Blackstone, Sr., my grandfather. The rights then passed to my father in 1982 and finally to me in 1999. But here's the twist that made my morning coffee taste like victory. Those rights included ownership of the entire lake bed, not just mineral extraction privileges. Every inch of the lake bottom, from one shore to the other, legally belonged to me. Back home, Margaret was unraveling like a ship taking on water. She reported my boat to the state environmental office as abandoned. She filed bogus complaints accusing me of operating a commercial business without permits apparently. One man with a fishing pole qualified as commercial fishing in her bizarre alternate universe where logic didn't exist. She even spread gossip about me being behind on property taxes, which was laughable considering I hadn't missed a payment in 23 years. Her vendetta didn't stop there. She went as far as contacting my part-time employer, implying I was unreliable and involved in neighborhood conflicts. Luckily, my boss knew me well enough to laugh off her nonsense, but her boldness was jaw-dropping. Meanwhile, Betty Kowalski had turned into a one-woman detective agency. Her digging uncovered that Margaret's HOA had never been properly incorporated with the state. It was nothing more than an informal neighborhood club with about as much legal authority as a quilting circle. "Theo," Betty said one morning over coffee, steam rising from our mugs as the smell of bacon filled her kitchen, "that woman's been running a scam from day one, not long after." Dale P. Dunn came by looking as uncomfortable as a vegetarian at a barbecue cook-off. He proposed a compromise: reduced HOA fees if I agreed to fish only on certain days. I declined politely, keeping my research to myself. Dale left frustrated, warning that Margaret wouldn't give up easily. He was more right than he knew. Desperation drove Margaret to hire a private investigator to dig through my life. She wanted dirt, criminal records, tax liens, anything. The Pi found nothing. His report described my finances as modest but solid, which surely wasn't the scandal Margaret had hoped for. Her frustration grew like weeds in summer heat. The intimidation tactics that worked in corporate boardrooms failed miserably on a guy whose biggest ambition was fishing in peace. So, Margaret went nuclear. She scheduled what she called a final compliance meeting at her house, set up like a hostile takeover negotiation, with Dale acting as a witness. She invited me to resolve things like adults, clearly expecting her usual intimidation routine to finally work. I agreed to attend and brought my own folder of documents. That evening, sitting in my truck, I reread my grandfather's original deed. The leather seat creaked as I leaned back, grinning. Margaret thought she was playing chess. In reality, I was about to flip the board. Tomorrow's meeting would be educational, just not for me. Attorney Samuel Bennett's office smelled of leather-bound law books and high-end coffee, the kind of place where justice doesn't come cheap but delivers results. I drove to the county seat with my grandfather's deed, hoping for answers but expecting another dead end. Bennett examined the documents with the precision of a surgeon, occasionally scribbling notes in handwriting so cryptic it might have needed a decoder ring. After 20 minutes of silence that felt like hours, he looked up. "Mr. Blackstone," he said, "this is remarkable. Your mineral rights don't just cover what's underground, they grant full ownership of the lake bottom and all surface water usage rights." My coffee cup stopped midair. The chair creaked as I leaned forward. "Come again." Bennett spread the documents across his mahogany desk like a royal flush. When Thompson Mining purchased these rights back in 1943, the law allowed full resource acquisition from surface water to bedrock, including perpetual access for extraction and related activities. Under modern law, that includes boating, swimming, and fishing. The revelation hit like a Category 5 hurricane made of pure justice. So when Margaret's HOA claims ownership, they're trying to collect fees for access to your private property, Bennett finished, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. Every fine, every restriction, every notice, it's all attempted theft of your rights. The silence was heavy enough to feel. I didn't just have permission to fish that lake. I owned it. For 6 months, Margaret had been running a protection on my property. Water rights can be tricky, but older mineral deeds often grant far more than just mining privileges. While I was realizing I owned the entire battlefield, Margaret was sending out final warning letters like a general at war with her own troops. Her ultimatum: 48 hours to pay HOA fees or face immediate enforcement action. She actually believed she had authority to protect community investment. Blissfully unaware she'd been threatening the rightful owner of the land and water. Bennett's paralegal soon unearthed Thompson Mining's 1962 comprehensive lake survey depth charts, spring maps, fish habitats, detailed records that would make modern environmental agencies envious. The brittle pages crackled like cereal as we unfolded them. "What are my options?" I asked, though deep down, I already knew. Cease and desist, Bennett said. Trespassing charges. Civil action for harassment. He studied me a moment longer. Or we let Mrs. Wyndham dig herself all the way to bedrock. Choose patience. Let her overplay her hand. Some lessons are best taught by consequences. Unknown to me, my quiet allies were already moving. Joyce from the courthouse, helping because her grandmother had once faced the same kind of bullying. The county surveyor, who'd long suspected something odd about the ownership. Deputy Morrison, quietly documenting every incident. Meanwhile, Margaret was finalizing her county commissioner presentation, complete with PowerPoint slides, catered snacks, and newspaper coverage. After Tuesday, she told Dale proudly, this lake will finally be managed properly. While she planned her coronation, I was building evidence packets, IAX records. Photos of unauthorized structures, a full harassment timeline. The musty courthouse air mixed with the fresh ink from the copier as I prepared Margaret's downfall in triplicate. The irony. Margaret had actually seen the lake tax records are paid by T. Blackstone. She assumed it was a typo, never realizing it referred to the very man she was harassing. Her meeting invitation promised to resolve lake access issues permanently. I accepted, asking if I could bring documentation. Her excitement at my supposed surrender would soon become the most expensive mistake of her life. That Sunday evening, the War Council met at my cabin. Betty, Joyce, and Attorney Bennett gathered around my kitchen table like generals planning D-Day. Betty brought cinnamon cookies that smelled like righteous defiance. The wood smoke mingled with coffee and quiet determination, the scent of people who'd finally had enough of being pushed around. All right, Bennett said, spreading out legal papers across the table like a general laying out battle plans. Let's talk about how to make the ownership reveal as impactful as possible. Joyce leaned forward, her glasses catching the warm glow of the lamp. We need to consider the other families Margaret's been bullying, she said firmly. This isn't just about Theo, it's about proving that people can't be pushed out of their homes by intimidation. Betty nodded so enthusiastically that her coffee nearly sloshed over the edge of her cup. That woman fined me $50 a day for my garden gnomes, she huffed. My late husband gave me those gnomes. Bennett, calm and methodical as ever, laid out my legal options with the patience of a professor teaching a class on justice. You can pursue criminal trespassing charges against anyone who built unauthorized structures on your land, he explained. And you also have grounds for civil damages, harassment, defamation, interference with your right to enjoy your property. He paused, peering over his reading glasses. But I get the feeling you're looking for something more educational than simply punitive. I am, I admitted. I want people to learn from this. Margaret isn't the first HOA tyrant, and she won't be the last. But maybe if this story becomes public enough, others will think twice before trying something similar. Bennett nodded. Violating property rights can lead to both criminal charges and civil liability. So document everything, dates, photos. Joyce pulled out what could only be described as an organizational masterpiece, a binder of evidence so thorough it could make a prosecutor tear up with joy. Every photo, letter, statement, and recording was cataloged by date, color-coded, and cross-referenced. The rhythmic click of her 3-hole punch had clearly been working overtime. We've got a side-by-side timeline, Joyce explained, pointing to one of her charts. On the left, Margaret's escalating claims. On the right, Theo's actual legal rights. The difference between the two is a Grand Canyon of liability. Meanwhile, Betty had coordinated with other residents Margaret had targeted, 4 families in total, all ready to testify at the county meeting. Each one had records of bogus fines and illegal HOA demands. Her kitchen table looked like mission control, littered with letters, photos, and handwritten accounts that told the story of small-town tyranny. The media angle came together thanks to Joyce's reporter friend at the County Chronicle. Initially skeptical when Joyce pitched the story of an HOA trying to seize a privately owned lake, the reporter quickly changed her tune after reviewing my deed documents. This is actually newsworthy, she admitted, the sound of excitement practically buzzing through the phone. I'll be at the county meeting to cover it. Bennett prepared a legal brief explaining riparian and mineral rights inheritance in plain English, complete with charts and boundary maps that even a hostile audience couldn't misinterpret. In disputes like this, he said, visuals beat legal jargon. Make it so clear even your grandmother would understand. The psychological strategy session became my favorite part. I want Margaret to go first, I said. Let her give her big presentation, lay out all her claims, and dig herself in deep before I reveal the truth. Betty looked uneasy, turning her coffee cup in her hands. Won't that be humiliating for her in front of everyone? Natural consequences, I said quietly. She's been publicly humiliating her neighbors for months. Sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to let them face their own fallout. Deputy Morrison had already shared her plan with me in private. Margaret had scheduled the sheriff's department to attend the meeting, ready to arrest me for trespassing immediately after her presentation. She believed she'd have the full weight of law enforcement on her side. I made sure the sheriff's office had certified copies of my property deed just in case they needed to know who actually owned the land. Our network of allies kept growing, rippling outward like waves on the lake. The county surveyor agreed to attend with boundary maps. The township attorney volunteered to verify our documentation. A contact from the state environmental agency was on standby to explain water rights law if needed. Every confirmed yes felt like one more nail in the coffin of Margaret's deception. Ironically, Margaret's own promotion of the county meeting worked in our favor. Her social media posts about protecting community property rights had drawn more attention than ever. She even invited 3 other HOA presidents from nearby neighborhoods, unwittingly enlarging the stage for her downfall. Bennett suggested we use that opportunity for something broader than just revenge. Let's make this educational, he said. He drafted handouts explaining how property owners could research their deeds, check for water rights, and contact the right legal resources. Too many people never read beyond the first page of their property description, he added. They don't realize what rights or restrictions they actually have. The physical preparation was simple, but symbolic. I cleaned and organized my fishing gear, planning to show up to the meeting straight from a morning on the lake. Betty coordinated rides for the elderly residents who wanted to attend but couldn't drive after dark. The county tax assessor agreed to appear as a neutral witness ready to confirm that I'd been paying taxes on the lake for years. He also mentioned something Margaret didn't know. She'd never paid taxes on the lake section she claimed as hers, because it wasn't legally part of her property. The environmental agency contact would be available by phone if the commissioners needed expert clarification on water law. Margaret's final overreach was a masterpiece of arrogance. She handed out invitations to a victory celebration scheduled for right after the county meeting. She reserved the community center, hired a caterer, and even brought in a photographer to capture her supposed moment of triumph. Her confidence peaked at precisely the wrong time, like a general celebrating before the battle had even begun. That evening, I opened a dusty old box of my grandfather's correspondence with Thompson Mining Company. The yellowed letters described his intention to preserve the lake for family recreation, fishing, relaxation, and peace. Reading his words, I realized this wasn't just about defending property rights. It was about protecting a legacy. I checked my watch 18 hours until the county meeting. Margaret had no idea she was walking straight into her own undoing. Time to go fishing one last time before everything changed. Monday morning arrived with the ping of my phone, Margaret's community safety alert lighting up the screen before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. She'd sent a mass message to every lake resident claiming there were unpaid taxes on the lake, creating an ownership vacuum. Her argument that the HOA needed to step in to protect community assets from government seizure. Within minutes, notifications chimed across the neighborhood, the chorus of panic stirred up by her lies. It was like watching someone shout fire in a crowded theater, only the fire didn't exist, and the theater was our quiet lakeside community. She wasn't done with her pre-meeting smear campaign. Margaret even tried to get me banned from attending the county meeting, filing a complaint that I'd threatened HOA members. The commissioner's office calmly reminded her that public meetings are open to all residents. I could practically hear her grinding her teeth through the phone. Meanwhile, Dale's faith was starting to crack. At an emergency HOA meeting that Monday evening, he finally spoke up. "Shouldn't we get a legal opinion on the lake ownership before the county meeting?" he asked, his tone full of anxious doubt. Margaret brushed him off with her trademark arrogance. "Possession is 9/10 of the law, Dale. We have the fences, the signs, the paperwork. They have excuses." The look on Dale's face said it all. He knew he'd backed the wrong horse. Margaret's social media campaign hit absurd new heights. She launched a Facebook group called Pine Ridge Lake Property Protection, posting pictures of me fishing with captions about unauthorized commercial activity threatening community safety. By then, she wasn't just overconfident, she was completely unhinged. She circulated bogus legal references claiming HOA control over shared areas, citations so ridiculous that any real lawyer would have doubled over laughing. The rapid clicking of her manicured nails on her phone sounded like a caffeinated woodpecker hammering at full speed. Meanwhile, I kept my usual rhythm, fishing at sunrise, lending a hand with neighbors' repairs, staying calm while Margaret spiraled into chaos. The contrast didn't go unnoticed. Betty mentioned that folks were beginning to see how composed I remained as Margaret grew increasingly frantic. The morning fog drifted over the lake like silent ghosts, while Margaret's piercing voice carried from her deck, shouting commands at her dwindling supporters like a commander losing control of her army. That afternoon, her private investigator submitted his final report: a clean record, average income, and solid reputation among longtime locals. But there was one overlooked detail that should have set off alarms. Subject owns more land than visible structures suggest. The file even referenced inherited mineral rights, though the investigator hadn't dug deep enough. Margaret completely missed the warning and fixated instead on what she saw as my financial weakness. She believed I was broke and cornered, never realizing I held property rights worth far beyond her luxury car. In her attempt to rally allies, Margaret hosted a property rights strategy meeting with 3 neighboring HOA presidents, each sharing stories about problem residents who resisted HOA control. Together, they plotted a joint presentation to expose so-called patterns of noncompliance. To sell her tale, Margaret spun a false narrative about property values dropping due to unregulated lake access, complete with cherry-picked real estate data that would make any statistician weep. Her next stunt was a desperate one: an environmental complaint claiming my dock endangered the lake ecosystem. When the state inspector arrived Tuesday morning, he took one look and was impressed. "Mr. Blackstone," he said, tapping the heavy timber, "this dock meets industrial-grade specs, likely stronger than most built today. These permits from the mining era are gold. Keep every document you've got." That evening, Betty's network turned up the key piece: Margaret hadn't paid a cent of property tax on the lakefront she claimed to own. The assessor confirmed her deed ended at the high-water mark like everyone else's. We reviewed the evidence over steaming mugs of coffee, the rising vapor almost symbolic of Margaret's case evaporating before our eyes. By Monday afternoon, Margaret had hired a second attorney, $2,000 for a supportive legal opinion. The lawyer drafted a beautiful letter built entirely on her twisted version of facts. It was worthless in court, but Margaret flaunted it like holy scripture. Then came a surprise package in my mailbox: copies of Margaret's private emails showing she'd been collaborating with other HOA letters to pressure problem homeowners financially and socially. Clearly, someone close to her was having doubts and wanted me equipped with proof of coordinated harassment. Her last-ditch media play collapsed spectacularly. She contacted the local paper, warning of a lake safety crisis, and even sent photos of my illegal fishing setup. But when the reporter checked her claims, she uncovered Margaret's true background: corporate HR, not environmental science. When pressed for details, Margaret lost her temper and revealed her real motive: people like him lower property values and attract the wrong crowd. That quote would come back to haunt her. Tuesday afternoon, I installed official boundary markers along my property line, standard procedure before any trespassing dispute. The steady thud of stakes hitting the soil sounded like drumbeats heralding a reckoning. My discreet cameras later caught Margaret's stunned reaction when she spotted the markers. Panic flashed across our face before she masked it and called an emergency meeting with Dale. The community was dividing. fast. Longtime locals quietly stood by me, while Margaret's followers began peeling away. A few HOA members even reached out privately, uneasy about her increasingly erratic behavior. The quiet rustle of papers being shuffled away from her cuz felt like the sound of rats leaving a sinking ship. By Tuesday evening, Margaret had crossed her own point of no return. She announced plans to have me arrested for criminal trespassing at the county meeting, even arranging for a private security team to perform a citizen's arrest if law enforcement wouldn't cooperate. She finalized her party booking and confirmed her photographer determined to immortalize her imagined victory. Her closing words to her loyal few: after tomorrow night, we'll never have to deal with his kind again. That night, I sat on my porch, listening to Lon's distant calls echo across the water while reviewing my evidence one final time. Margaret was about to discover that some fishing hulls bite back harder than expected. Wednesday dawned poetic in its irony. I followed my routine, casting my line into the calm lake exactly where Margaret claimed HOA ownership. The water mirrored the sunrise soft pinks and golds reflected in perfect stillness, as if the world itself had no room for bullies. From her window, Margaret watched through binoculars, phone already in hand. Within 10 minutes, Deputy Morrison's cruiser crunched up the gravel path, breaking the morning calm. "Thea," he sighed, stepping out with the weary resignation of a man sent on a fool's errand. "She's filed another complaint. I have to ask you to leave until the meeting tonight." I nodded, packing my tackle box with the same steady movements I'd repeated for over 2 decades. Across the water, Margaret stood on her deck in a cream blazer worth more than a month's rent, arms folded triumphantly as if she'd just conquered Everest in stilettos. The click of her heels echoed like a victory march as she disappeared inside, probably rehearsing her big speech one last time. All day, she prepared for her moment like a general before battle. Arriving 2 hours early with her trio of neighboring HOA presidents each dressed in matching navy blazers, they looked more like a cult than a committee. Her group carried binders, posters, and enough paperwork to insulate a house. She saved the front row for supporters, distributed talking points on safety and property value protection, and tested her PowerPoint presentation 3 separate times. The hired photographer set up his gear as though covering a royal coronation, not a county dispute about fishing rights. Dale voiced one final concern, his voice cracking under the weight of regret. "Are we sure we even have legal authority here?" Margaret dismissed him with the grandeur of an empress brushing away a servant. "Dale, we've come too far to show weakness now." At 6:45 p.m., I arrived 15 minutes early and fresh from my unsuccessful fishing trip. Carrying nothing but my tackle box and a single manila folder, I looked for all the world like a man who'd simply wandered in from the lake. My faded flannel shirt and scuffed work boots stood in sharp contrast to Margaret's immaculate outfit and her followers' matching corporate attire. Betty Joyce and the other longtime locals had positioned themselves around the room like seasoned guerrillas ready for quiet, strategic resistance. We didn't sit together or share any visible plan, just took our places and waited. The atmosphere was electric with unspoken tension. The county commissioners at the front exchanged knowing looks as they recognized familiar faces among the crowd. Margaret's crew, clustered in identical blazers, whispered nervously like actors awaiting their cue. The county newspaper reporter sat in the back with her photographer, pen poised. The air was thick with the mixed sense of floor polish, nervous sweat, and the faint tang of justice on the horizon. Commissioner Williams struck the gavel precisely at 7 p.m., calling the meeting to order. After breezing through routine matters, road repairs, budget approvals, he turned to the next agenda item: public comment regarding Pine Ridge Lake access and homeowners association concerns. "Ms. Wyndham, you have the floor." Margaret practically floated to the podium, her PowerPoint glowing on the screen like a corporate presentation straight from the ninth circle of bureaucracy. Her slides gleamed with graphs, statistics, and professional photos that would have made a PR firm proud. Commissioners, concerned residents. She began smoothly, her tone that of someone far too used to being obeyed. "I'm here tonight representing the Pine Ridge Lake Homeowners Association to discuss a critical community safety issue." Her presentation was a masterclass in manipulation, almost too polished. Images of my fishing gear were labeled as unauthorized commercial equipment. She displayed charts alleging a decline in property values due to unregulated lake access, sprinkled in quotes from her petition about liability risks, and proudly presented her 47 signatures as though unveiling the Declaration of Independence. "The HOA isn't trying to prevent recreation," Margaret claimed in a voice dripping with false reasonableness. "We're simply asking for county support to enforce reasonable safety standards and access restrictions." Then she dropped the bomb. "The HOA has assumed responsibility for managing the lake because no definitive private ownership exists." That line hung in there like a live grenade. Her finale was pure corporate spin. "We must protect our shared community investment from those who disregard progress and property values. Therefore, I'm requesting that the county grant Pine Ridge Lake HOA Enforcement Authority over lake access, recognize our citation program for trespassing, and officially acknowledge us as the managing body of this community resource." Her supporters burst into applause. The photographer captured her triumphant smile, though Dale looked like he wanted to melt through the floor. Commissioner Williams cleared his throat, a sound that sliced through the noise like a gavel. "Thank you, Ms. Wyndham. That was very comprehensive." He glanced across the room. "Are there any responses or alternate viewpoints?" I raised my hand slowly, deliberately, like a student who had waited all semester for this moment. Margaret's smirk widened. She clearly expected excuses or a quiet surrender. Her posture radiated smug certainty, shoulders squared, chin lifted, arms crossed like she'd already won. Commissioner Rodriguez nodded. "Mr. Blackstone, please step forward." I walked to the podium, manila folder in hand. Each step of my work boots echoed across the floor like the countdown to her undoing. The room went silent, so still the hum of the fluorescent lights filled the air. Margaret leaned back, confident I'd come to beg or bargain. Instead, I opened my folder with the unhurried composure of someone holding a royal flush and said 7 words that drained the color from her face. "Commissioners, I'd like to clarify property ownership." I began with courtesy because gratitude softens the ground before the strike. "Thank you, Commissioners, for your time and for upholding this public process. And thank you, Ms. Wyndham, for your thorough presentation on community management." Margaret's smile deepened. She thought I was conceding. "I agree," I continued evenly, "that responsible lake management is essential, which is precisely why I've made sure my property taxes are always current. I've paid them faithfully for 23 years on Pine Ridge Lake." The shift in the room was immediate, like the sudden stillness before a storm breaks. I opened the folder with deliberate slowness, the rustle of paper amplified by silence. "Ms. Wyndham stated that no clear private ownership exists for the lake," I said. "I'd like to correct that." I withdrew a certified copy of my property deed, the county seal glinting under the fluorescent lights. This deed, dated 1958, shows that my grandfather, Theodore Blackstone Sr., purchased full mineral and water rights to Pine Ridge Lake from Thompson Mining Company. Margaret's expression flickered from smug to stunned in less than a heartbeat. "These rights," I continued, "include ownership of the lakebed and perpetual access for extraction and related activities. Under modern law that covers fishing, swimming, and boating." I placed the deed before the commissioners with the calm precision of an attorney presenting exhibit in a courtroom. Commissioner Williams leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Mr. Blackstone, are you claiming you own the lake?" "Not claiming, sir," I replied. "Stating fact. I own the lakebed, the water rights, and have paid property taxes on both every year since inheriting the estate in 1999. The room exploded into murmurs, buzzing like a disturbed hornet's nest. Margaret shot up from her chair, her pristine cream blazer suddenly appearing less like a symbol of authority and more like a costume in a play that had gone terribly off script. "This is impossible," she stammered, her voice cracking with panic that no amount of professional composure could disguise. "We researched the ownership. This can't be legal." From the middle rows, Attorney Bennett rose calmly. "If I may, Commissioners," he said, "Samuel Bennett, representing Mr. Blackstone, I can clarify the matter of property law here." Commissioner Rodriguez gestured for him to continue, clearly intrigued by what was quickly becoming a better show than anything on television. Bennett stepped forward with the calm assurance of a man who had studied every statute twice. Riparian rights and mineral rights inheritance can be complicated, he began, but this particular case is rather straightforward. Thompson Mining Company acquired full resource rights in 1943, and those rights were never revoked. They passed legitimately through inheritance to Mr. Blackstone. He presented the chain of documentation, every transfer from Thompson Mining to the holding company, then to Mr. Blackstone's grandfather, and finally to him, all properly notarized and recorded. Furthermore, Bennett continued, the HOA represented by Ms. Wyndham has been charging access fees for use of Mr. Blackstone's private property. Every fine, every restriction, every so-called violation, all were attempts to interfere with his lawful property rights. Margaret's complexion shifted from ivory to pale to an alarming shade of red, somewhere between fury and fainting. You can't just claim ownership of an entire lake, she shouted. What about our investments, our property values? Commissioner Williams raised a hand for silence. Ms. Wyndham, please. Mer. Bennett, do you have proof of Mr. Blackstone's tax payments? Before Bennett could respond, Joyce stood from her seat. Commissioner, she said confidently, Joyce Miller, County Land Records Office. I can confirm that Mr. Blackstone has paid property taxes on the lake every year since 1999. I can also confirm that Ms. Wyndham's HOA never filed incorporation papers with the state, meaning they have no legal authority to collect fees or impose restrictions. From the back, the county tax assessor added, I can verify that record. Mer. Blackstone's payments are current and consistent. Ms. Wyndham has never paid lakefront taxes. Her deed, like all others, ends at the high water mark. Margaret looked as if someone had pulled the floor out from under her designer heels. Her supporters whispered among themselves, loyalty dissolving faster than morning dew in August. Dale, the HOA treasurer, broke the silence with a resigned sigh. I'm done. This isn't what I signed up for, he said loudly enough for the whole room to hear. Commissioner Williams called for a short recess to review the evidence. During those 10 minutes, Margaret stood motionless at the front of the room while her photographer quietly packed up his gear. Her supporters scattered, retreating faster than Napoleon from Moscow. Betty approached me, eyes glistening. Theo, does this mean she can't find me for my garden gnomes anymore? Betty, I said with a grin, it means she never had the power to find anyone for anything. When the commissioners returned, Williams spoke with the finality of a judge delivering a verdict. After reviewing all presented documents, we confirm that Mr. Blackstone's property ownership is legally valid and comprehensive. The Pine Ridge Lake Homeowners Association holds no authority to collect fees, levy fines, or restrict access to private property. Furthermore, any HOA structures built on Mr. Blackstone's land are considered trespassing and must be removed immediately. Sheriff Martinez, who had been standing in the back waiting for Margaret's prior request to arrest me, raised an eyebrow. Just so I'm clear, he said, half smiling, you want me to arrest Mr. Blackstone for trespassing on his own land? The room erupted in laughter of the kind that feels like justice wrapped in poetic irony. Margaret snatched her purse and bolted toward the exit, her heels clacking against the floor in a frantic rhythm of defeat. The photographer, the party planner, the celebration, all now waiting for a victory that had just turned into humiliation. A reporter caught her at the door. Ms. Wyndham, would you like to comment? No comment, she barked, shoving past and storming into the parking lot where her BMW waited like a getaway car. I stayed behind to answer questions, because that's what you do when you win with dignity instead of arrogance. A week later, I woke to something I hadn't experienced in months: absolute silence. No humming security cameras. No shrill demands from across the water. Just the serene sounds of loons and gentle waves against the dock. The county had ordered all unauthorized structures removed from my property within 72 hours. Margaret's decorative fence vanished by Thursday. The security cameras came down Friday. The private HOA property signs disappeared faster than free pizza at a union meeting. I returned to my dawn fishing routine in peace. The mist rising off the lake carried that same earthy scent of pine and damp soil that reminded me why I had fallen in love with this place 23 years ago. The crunch of gravel under my boots at the boat launch sounded like a victory march I never asked for, but had definitely earned. Within days, 3 families formally withdrew from the HOA. With Dale gone and Margaret's supposed authority proven false, the organization dissolved like sugar in hot coffee. The rest stopped paying fees and quietly peeled the HOA stickers off their mailboxes. The following Saturday, Betty organized a community cleanup to undo Margaret's so-called improvements. 23 neighbors showed up, even some who had once stood with Margaret. We pulled up fence posts, filled in holes, and restored the fishing trail to the way it was meant to be: open, honest, and shared. Former HOA members returned with tools and with apologies. One couple even brought homemade barbecue that smelled like redemption and tasted like community healing. The rhythmic thud of fence posts being pried from the ground echoed like freedom itself. Within 2 weeks, Margaret listed her lakefront house for sale. The for sale sign appeared on a Tuesday. By the following Monday, she and her BMW were gone, and with her, the tension that had poisoned our once peaceful neighborhood. Her property sold below market value after 45 days. Apparently, being known for harassing your neighbors isn't great for curb appeal. The buyers, the Patterson family, chose the home precisely for its fishing access and quiet surroundings. Their kids spent their first weekend laughing on the dock, casting lines into the water of a lake that now truly belonged to everyone who treated it with respect. Soon after, Joyce organized a Know Your Property Rights workshop at the local library. 73 people from 3 counties showed up. Attorney Bennett volunteered his time, offering free sessions on how to research deeds, confirm HOA legitimacy, and safeguard property owners from future harassment. Most property disputes come from ignorance, he said. Education saves people from years of unnecessary conflict. Inspired, I created an informal lake access agreement for all the neighbors: no fees, no fine print, just mutual respect. My only rules were simple: honor fishing hours, don't litter, and don't bother others. At the boat launch, I put up a modest wooden sign that read Blackstone Family Lake, all welcome. Fish responsibly. Several neighbors offered to pay me for access, but I declined every time. This was never about money, it was about rebuilding community. Word spread quickly through local property owner networks, faster than gossip at a Sunday potluck. 2 other overreaching HOA letters soon faced legal challenges from newly informed residents who learned to verify every claim before handing over a dime. The county commissioners even tightened HOA formation laws, requiring stricter documentation to prevent another Margaret situation. Meanwhile, Betty's garden gnome collection returned to its full glory, and then some. Neighbors added 3 new gnomes, including one holding a tiny fishing pole that made me chuckle every time I passed by. Betty later turned her front yard into a gnome sweet gnome garden tour, which quickly became a beloved annual tradition. I proposed a yearly lake cleanup and fish habitat restoration event, partnering with state environmental experts for guidance. Together, we established a memorial scholarship fund honoring Grandpa Blackstone's conservation legacy. 3 annual awards for local students pursuing environmental science. Because true property ownership isn't about control, it's about stewardship, when managed wisely. Private land can uplift an entire community. That same summer, we launched the first Pine Ridge Lake Days Festival, celebrating nature, unity, and the kind of neighborly respect Margaret never understood. Kids joined fishing contests. Adults swapped stories over smoky barbecue, and everyone remembered why small-town life still mattered. My morning fishing ritual slowly turned into a shared moment of calm. A few neighbors joined me at dawn, as sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. We just shared coffee, quiet laughter, and the soft rhythm of casting lines into mirrored water. My back pain even eased with the stress gone, and good company around. It's funny how constant tension wears on you until it's finally gone. One morning, Betty's cousin told me about her own HOA nightmare of community garden tangled in city council corruption and shady land grabs. I just smiled, sipped my coffee, and watched the sunrise paint the lake in colors you never get tired of. Some people never learn, I told her. But bullies always meet their match eventually. Justice isn't always about revenge, sometimes it's about setting off a ripple that protects others before they ever need protecting. Now it's your turn to share your worst HOA story in the comments. I read every single one, and yours might be featured next. If you believe in standing up for your property rights, hit subscribe and ring that notification bell because new justice stories drop every Tuesday. And remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's watching a bully realize they picked a fight with someone who owns the entire battlefield. That's it for today's episode of HOA Madness. If watching justice serve itself made your day, hit that like button, drop your thoughts below. And stay tuned, more unbelievable neighborhood showdowns are just around the corner.